This episode of The Therapy Show is sponsored by Therapy Notes. Why not find out what more than 100,000 mental health professionals already know and try Therapy Notes for 2 months absolutely free? Just click on the link in the show notes or enter promo code LISA at therapynotes.com. Welcome to the Therapy Show podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard. In each episode, I interview a seasoned and knowledgeable talk therapist from the counseling world to glean valuable insights, techniques, and tools that you can apply to your practice and your life. And if you're considering a career in the counseling field or just want to hear about what it's like to be a talk therapist, then this is the podcast for you. Well, hey there. Welcome back to another episode of The Therapy Show. Today, I have a very special guest. Her name is Amy Smitke, and she is an LISW-S, and she's a trailblazer in the field of clinical mental health supervision. She's a visionary who believes that continuous learning, collaboration, and shared experiences are the keys to extraordinary growth and success. She's the creator of the just launched Supervision Success Alliance, a unique membership platform designed to empower and support supervisors in their journey. And I'm excited to dive into her journey and learn more about how she's changing the landscape of clinical mental health supervision. But before we dive into this episode, just a reminder that you can get 15 NBCC approved contact hours for $30. Purchase the podcourse bundle now, and any podcourses I release in the future will be added to the bundle at no extra cost to you. Hurry, because the price of this bundle will be going up soon, and I'm already working on some ethics podcourses to be released this fall, and you don't want to miss out on this deal. Well, what's a podcourse? It's a podcast audio plus a self-study course, so you can listen anytime, anywhere, and when you're ready, take the short quiz, complete the podcourse evaluation, and then download your certificate. Okay, let's dive into this interview with Amy. Well, hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. This week's guest is Amy Smitke. Welcome to the show, Amy. It's so awesome to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to talking with you and being on here today. It's a privilege to be, a guest. So,
oh, well, thanks. I appreciate that. I'm just, I love what you're doing and how you're helping therapists. So could you share with our listeners who you are, maybe a little bit about how you landed in becoming a social worker, and then of course tell us about your cool stuff that you have, and we'll get into the details of all of that as well.
Sure. So, I'm one of those really odd people. So I'm a social worker in Ohio. I'm independent and a supervision designation. So we do have that separate thing in Ohio where we're designated separately. So it's a little bit easier to know who can provide supervision and who can't. And so I've been a licensed social worker 13 years now, and I've been supervising for 13 years, a little over 13, and I've had my supervision designation for a decade, and been supervising, sometimes not intentionally or formally, pretty much since the beginning. I got kind of, I would say it would be like my second job in the field. So like 2 years in to the field, I started accidentally being assigned interns and so started doing that kind of stuff. And that's a little bit of the beginning of my story, but I'll come back to that in a second. As far as wanting to be a social worker, I think it's multifaceted for me. I'm someone who's wanted to be a therapist since I was in 5th grade.
Oh, wow.
And I know that's not normal. So, but I actually remember the very moment that I was like, oh yeah, that's what I'm gonna do.
Uh-huh.
I was with my best friend. We used to have here in Ohio a place called Geauga Lake. It's kind of like a water park up north, which is now where our Cedar Point is. But and I remember being up there on like a summer vacation with my best friend and her mom and her sisters and her cousin. And her youngest sister at the time was in a car seat. So she was, I don't know, maybe 3, 2,
Mhm.
3. She wasn't very old. And I was in the back seat with her. I don't know what the conversation was, but obviously it was not having a normal conversation with a 3-year-old. And her mom was like, you should totally be a therapist. And
Aw.
I was like, huh, okay. Like, because I think a lot of us maybe at some point in our lives have found that people just naturally gravitate toward comfort with us. They
Mm-hmm.
tell us things, they open up, they feel safe with us.
Mm-hmm.
And that was always comfortable for me. And I think I've always had a weirdly introspective mind. So I always call myself like the perfect science experiment because I'm adopted. And but I'm adopted within the family. So I have a very close relationship with my biological mom.
Mm-hmm.
She's more like a sister to me. And she was my second cousin, and her and my mom were close. And she was young when she had me and my brother, and I got adopted. When I've been with them since my parents, since I was 2 weeks old. They adopted me when I was 3, officially.
Mm-hmm.
And she's always been a part of my life. Drugs was a big issue for her, and part of the reason I think I have a strong passion for that particular subcategory population in the field. But I always, growing up, both of my moms, if you want to call them that, were always very engaged in volunteer work, like working with MRDD, like doing kind of that social work kind of jobs without a social work license, not in an official way, but those are the types of jobs they tended to do. And my mom, I always thought her she was like the Mother Teresa, because she would give more than she ever had. And that's just who she was.
Right.
And so, but growing up, I think I observed a lot of that very
Mm-hmm.
naturally, just seeing how they both engaged with people and treated people. But then, like, my mom would always say, like, I would have behaviors that she was like, oh my gosh, that is like your bio mom, like things that like I hadn't been around her enough when I was really little that I would pick up on.
Yeah.
And so I think I became very fascinated with like the nature versus nurture like experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so it always gave me a very introspective way to look at the world and work at people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of where I started going, I want to do psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was in my undergrad, not knowing at the time until I was vested, you can't do anything with a psychology degree without a master's degree. But my senior advisor, when I was like, okay, what do I do next since I can't do anything with this?
Mm-hmm.
I can't do therapy with this. He actually recommended social work. And he said you could go counseling, but for the opportunity, the flexibility, all of these things, I would choose social work. And I would admit, like, the advice he gave me was very spot on. And so that's why I kind of went to the social work program, and I ended up going to High State, and kind of been in the field ever since in terms of where I went and why I went to social work specifically in the field.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been able to do counseling with it the entire time. And so it's been very interesting to kind of start with that kind of weird mindset from 5th grade
Yeah.
and really see it through freshman, because most kids at that age want to be
Mm-hmm.
something grander, and then as they go to like, yeah, that's really not
Right.
for me.
Yeah. Well, that's such an interesting story and how you got to where you are. And, I love it. Thank you for sharing that. I think that, we all come to this work because of some reason that we have this calling, I think. And I
Yeah.
love that that's where you felt it come from. So how did you get into like supervision, and how did it become something that you decided that you were going to dive into and create um this training and this membership?
Yeah. So again, I think just naturally throughout my career, sometimes not intentionally, I would have interns and I would do those types of things. And then I don't think I ever was intentional about, oh, I really enjoy this, I'm going to seek it out for many years. Um, Even though I went and got my supervisory license, I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just felt like that was the next step.
Sure.
And I was really fortunate to have mostly really good supervisors. I think most of us probably had an unfortunate experience, but for the most part, I had really strong supervisors early on in my career, which I think were a strong foundation for who I am in the field and who I am as a person, and who I am as a supervisor.
Mhm.
And so towards the later part of my career, like I said, I always kind of would help on the new trainees, build trainings, like curriculums from small companies. I worked at a lot of small companies. Um, And so I would do some of those things kind of naturally, just like, how do I support people? How do I help people
Mm.
from a almost mentoring type experience? And I would have a lot of people, um, now I have people I've worked with in the past or supervised. They're like, hey, I have someone that is trying to figure out what they want to do with their life, career wise, like more mentorship. Like, can they reach out to you? Like, everything that you've ever shared has been so helpful for me.
Mhm.
And so I think always just being willing to share my experience and be honest with people
Right.
about what that looks like, has just been who I am. And I never initially thought of that as a supervising thing. I thought of that as just that's what you do with people.
Sure.
And before I went into private practice a few years ago, I was wanting to get out of where I was. I had taken a job working for the insurance company, so I worked for the dark side for a little bit, which was informative and beneficial in a lot of ways. But I really missed that clinical work, and so I'd applied for a bunch of things, and I got an opportunity, a pretty amazing one, at the age of 30, to be a clinical director of a brand new company. They were fresh. They were starting from the ground up. I needed to create all the curriculums, the programs. I need to get them accredited, like all of these things. And they took a chance on me, given that I hadn't really done anything like that before. And so obviously, as the clinical director, I had to do all the supervision for everybody and those types of things. And I did love that. And for a long time, we were small enough I could still do clinical work,
Mhm.
which helped me balance it. But that we grew enough that it was like, this is too much for me and too many politics.
Mm.
I'm not a fan. And I felt like that really hindered. I really enjoyed my individual space with people
Mhm.
where I could really help them grow. And I saw the value in that. And I started to see a lot of them having such bad previous experiences. And I was like, wow, people really have like consistently bad experiences with supervision.
Mm.
And so it made me more vested, I
Mm.
think, in what I was offering and how I was helping.
Right.
And when I decided to leave to go into private practice, I was like, okay, this will be all I do.
Mhm.
And so then I was just doing that. And I was like, I still feel like I'm missing something, right?
Mhm.
Because I can't really do with clients the same I could do in supervision, right? Lead people in a more coaching kind of environment. Um, and so I gotten an opportunity to start doing for another private practice in supervision. And so I started to do that slowly. And then I was like, I really enjoy the space that this provides, how I can help people grow,
Mm.
develop, experience supervision. And then as I was trying to educate and develop myself, I realized how much lack of resources there really was for supervisors. Like, it's
Mhm.
like, okay, you go get your supervision, but when you become it, there's nothing for you,
Mhm.
or it's very limited, or it's very outdated. And so that's why I was like, well, I'm going to educate the best I can. And then I started seeing other people having a similar struggle in a lot of groups, which is where I started my Facebook group. No
Mm.
one had consistent groups or places to find supervisees or
Mhm.
supervisors. There was because there's no consistency across states.
Right.
People having trouble finding internships. So I created a Facebook group that's just a free resource to help link with people and give resources and education. And from that, I was like, well, I could still make some guides. I could still make a membership. I can still do all these other things that are really going to allow people that want to be supervisors become better
Mhm.
supervisors. Because, if you do any research, and it's not like there's an abundance of it, but there is research out there that talks about the link between the impact of supervision
Mhm.
on job satisfaction, compassion fatigue, retention, professional development, their own mental health and
Mhm.
well-being. Like, if you don't have good supervision,
Mhm.
those things suffer. And we already have so many challenges in the field for us as professionals that quality supervision shouldn't be one of them.
Try Therapy Notes, the #1 rated electronic health record system available today. With live telephone support 7 days a week, it's clear why Therapy Notes is rated 4.9 out of 5 stars on Trustpilot.com and Google. Therapy Notes makes billing, scheduling, note-taking, and telehealth incredibly easy. And now, for all you prescribers out there, Therapy Notes is proudly introducing ePrescribe. And if you're coming from another electronic health record, Therapy Notes makes the transition quite simple, importing your demographic data free of charge so you can get going right away. So why not find out what more than 100,000 mental health professionals already know and try Therapy Notes for 2 months absolutely free. Just click on the link in the show notes or enter the promo code Lisa at therapynotes.com. Try it today with no strings attached and see why everyone is switching to Therapy Notes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm right there with you. I'm like, amen, like what you're saying. I totally feel it. And I'm thinking back to when I had supervision, and my supervisor, he made such an impact on me, and my, just my evolution as a therapist. And I often think back to our conversations with him, and I think, what would he do in this situation? How would he approach it? So I am so glad that you have put together this amazing membership, and you're helping therapists become better supervisors, so they can help the next generation of clinicians, which I think is so great. So okay, well, my first question is, I'm an LMFT, you're a social worker, your supervision program, does it cover like, can a LMFT in South Carolina take your benefit from what you're sharing? And how does that all work with like the licensure or all that stuff? I don't even know.
So I try to keep my stuff as general as possible. That really, because I look into all the competencies, and because I also adjunct professor, and I work with social work students as a liaison for their internships. And so I could pretty much, I really thought about it. I could give you verbatim every competency the social work practice has.
Right.
But I've also had counseling students. I've had MFT supervisees, because in the state of Ohio, because of that limitation of MFT supervisors, they're allowed to do about a quarter of their hours with LPCCS or an LISW-S.
Okay.
And so I have taken on a few of them to do part of their supervision. And in doing that, I have worked really hard to try to understand their competencies. And so when I create some of these guides, I keep that in mind. And so some of them, like I have like supervision guides for supervisees to help get the most out of their supervision, right? Like guide them. And in some of those, I very specifically, hey, here's this one for the social worker, here's this from MFT. And really the biggest difference is I highlight the competencies in there. So that they know, like, okay, as I'm doing supervision, what competency am I working towards?
Okay.
Like, they're there for a reason.
Right.
And I think we are aware of those during our internships, but post-internship, we kind of forget about them. We're so focused on ethics and law that we forget about, like, what are our core competencies about how we're practicing. And so I take that into consideration when I make any of the things that I do make, so that it is really universal. And then anywhere that is, more specific to like ethics and rules, I also say that changes from state to state. Like your laws and regulations are going to be very state specific, and I couldn't possibly know all of those.
Yeah.
Hard enough to keep up with my own state. And and then always, refer back to your ethics, because they are going to be a little bit different from practice to practice, and which I find very interesting. But so the membership that I just launched today, we'll have consultation groups. We'll have I'm going to do training. I'm going to work towards getting my CE provider license, so I can provide CEs as part of the membership. I've already put in a bunch of tools and resources, and they're really meant to be general. How do I engage? How do I approach ethics? How do I work in the virtual world, right? The confidentiality and ethics around that. So I think a lot of the components that I try to address are pretty universal,
Mhm.
and there would be very limited changes among professional like licensures.
I gotcha.
So
Okay. So it's really a membership for a newer supervisor, it sounds like. Or even if you've been doing it for a while and you kind of want to up your skills or maybe learn some new things, this would be an appropriate membership for somebody as well who's kind of been doing it for a little bit. So you kind of have
yeah,
two
absolutely. So there's
audiences.
some definitely some introductory things there.
Mhm.
I'll be adding some advanced, but what I also want is a community. So like there is a Facebook group for clinical supervisors, but as you know, with general Facebook groups, or if you
Right.
don't have someone like yourself running it,
Hmm.
um, it can be, it's not really a community, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And so what I find with a lot of supervisors is, you know, it can be isolating as a supervisor,
Sure.
especially depending on how and where you do that.
Hmm.
And so I feel like the membership would be a community that we can come and really have conversations about their challenges.
Gotcha.
That's what the consultation, I think, even as I would like to feel like I'm a pretty seasoned supervisor. And there's still times where thankfully for me, I have my business partner, my group practice as a supervisor, and I have some, I'm still very good friends actually with previous supervisors that I had early on in my career. So I do have some people that I feel like I could reach out to if I have concerns or questions. And I also have a really good relationship with the board here. So I email them all the time.
Right.
And I'm always like, hey, I got this situation, and they get back to me very responsive here. I know not all states have that, but so I feel like I do have a lot of resources and I know how to utilize them and access them, but I don't know that everybody feels that, whether they're a seasoned clinician or not. So I wanted to create a space where, you know, I'm 20 years in the field, and this, because we know the field's constantly changing.
Hmm.
And how do I go about this situation? You
Hmm.
know, and then there's a community around how do we support that person so they're supported in a pretty isolating
Right.
part of the field.
Yeah, that's great. So I love how you are putting in the consultation and the peer support. I think that's what's needed. So I think that's really awesome. So what is the name of the membership? What's it called?
So it's the Supervision Success Alliance.
Okay. All right. So you guys will put the link in the show notes so if you want to check it out. And
Yeah.
then you were sharing earlier that it's going to be an app that goes with it. Is that right?
So the app doesn't specifically go with the
Oh,
membership.
okay. Okay.
But I have conversation starters. So, I know for myself, like there's definitely times where my clinicians have staffed everything, right? They don't have a lot of new content. And so I have a couple different things. I have a free guide. I am working on the full robust guide, which is I think 90 supervision session topics kind of done for you. Hey, here's talking points. Here's some sample activities that you can do. So they're really engaged in supervision. But I think that sometimes, one, we only rely on case consultation, and supervision should be significantly more than that.
Sure.
But sometimes I don't know that all of us know how to present information, if that makes sense. Or I know I get this a lot, like I might have a couple cases that are staffed. I may have, hey, let's talk about this topic, or let's do some practice test questions for a little while. I'd like to do that intermittently so they're getting some experience in, practicing for the exam. But then sometimes I'm like, I have 10 minutes left. It's not a lot of time per se to cover a robust topic. And so these conversation starters were kind of some of those are questions, like literally they've been ethics questions that have come up in my own supervisions that I've reached out to the board for. And I was like, these are great questions
Mhm.
that you wouldn't find anywhere else.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I created, right now you can purchase and download them, and you could cut them out and have them available to you to do in supervision. But I have over 300 starters where it's just, here's a prompt, let's talk about it. And currently my VA is putting it onto an app that will be
Mhm.
available, I hope in the next week or so, hopefully less, that people could then pull up the app. In Supervision, it will randomly, pull up a prompt, and then you can use Supervision to have a couple, random,
Yeah.
there's um, ethics, there's cultural awareness, there's just a vast variety. Some of them are medical related, some are corrections, so
Mhm.
there's subpopulations in there. So they kind of cover a little bit of a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I love that you're using, technology to like an app. I mean, I never would have thought of that. Like but it makes so much sense. Like I love
Yeah.
that you're doing that. So talk to me about the therapist out there that's listening that says, I'm not a supervisor, but man, it would be cool I've thought about it. How do I get into it and how do I earn a side income with becoming a supervisor?
Yeah. So some of that may vary a little bit from
Mhm.
state. Some of it definitely vary from state to
Sure.
state in regards to just the licensing process, right? Some states, so for instance, Ohio,
Mhm.
um, MFTs, LPCs, and social workers are relatively the same in Ohio. We don't have LMHCs here, like you're a social worker or you're a counselor or you're a marriage and family therapist. There's no other, except for a chemical dependency counselor, but that's obviously a very different subset.
Mhm.
So in Ohio, for instance, for social work, um, you have to be independently licensed. So whatever that looks like in your state. And I will say I've looked at a lot of states and they're usually pretty
Mhm.
similar-ish.
Yeah.
Some variances from some states, but so you usually have to have your independent license, and that varies from state to state what that process is going to look like and time frame is going to look like.
Okay.
But once you're a clinical or independent, whatever that highest level is that you need to have for your state to practice independently. So in Ohio, it's an LISW. So once we have that, for a social worker, I have 1 year post that I have to do, and then I have to complete, I think it's 9 hours of supervision CEUs, and then I apply, and then I can get approved. It's concerning or not, so simple.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
and there's no regulation, which I wish there kind of was on what type of supervision CEUs you have
Yeah.
and those types of things. But so it's a little bit different, a little more challenging, if you will,
Mhm.
for MFTs and LPCs. LPCs in Ohio still have that year designation. They still have 9 or 12 hours of CEUs for them, but they actually have to, for that year, be supervising somebody else. So they have
Right.
to have like a supervisor sign off.
Mhm.
And so MFTs are similar in that, but they actually have a 2 year window that they have to cover between independent and S.
Okay.
So there's a little bit lengthier of a process than LPCs or LSWs. So I would say when I've looked at, and I've looked at many other states, most of them would probably be relatively similar.
Mhm.
So what I would encourage somebody to do who's interested in it is, and I think I do actually have some of these worksheets in my course. So the Launch Your Supervision Practice, which is what that is. But so I have some guides in there that kind of help you go through the process of like identifying. Actually, I think I put a prompt on my social media the other day too about it. But like why do you want to be a supervisor? So I think it's important that you understand your intention behind it. If it's just to have a side income, that's probably not the best intention to provide really quality supervision for the next generation of providers. um, so I think it's important to understand why and what you kind of bring to the table, and then understand who is your ideal, kind of like we would do an ideal client, like who is my ideal supervisee. Is there population I have a lot of experience with? I think I could provide a lot of support and education for that. So kind of that little bit of that self awareness process journey of like why you want to do it. So I think that's some really important. I think the next step is to then look at your state requirements and say what does that require? Is it a certain amount of time? Is it certain CEUs? Like what is that? And then figure out what does that look like on where you're at in that process. Have you been in it long enough and you really just need to take the CEUs and apply? And then while you're either applying or waiting, really look into understand your state's regulations on what is your job and what is your role as a training supervisor? Because that can be the same, but is also different from a clinical supervisor.
Okay.
Right. So a training supervisor is meant to provide the hours that somebody needs to become independent or clinically licensed.
Right.
And so you could be a training and a clinical supervisor, but you might be a clinical supervisor and not a training supervisor or vice versa.
Okay.
So for me, for many of my supervisees, I'm strictly their training supervisor. They have at their agency a clinical supervisor who really oversees their day-to-day operations. And I'm doing their supervision to help them meet licensure. And so there's a little bit of a difference there. So really understanding that, but like knowing like in the state, how many people I can have in a group, or some states limit how many people you can even supervise at one time, what the process is for providing the education or providing the hours that you submitted, like understand the rules around what qualifies as supervision time, what doesn't. Some states it's all in person, some states you can do virtual. Some states you can only do so much of group and have the rest have to be individual. So there's a lot of variances between states and licensure that those are. So I think it's important for you to very clearly understand and ask questions about that before you do it. So I think that protects you and it protects the people that you're going to be providing supervision to.
Right.
Because I found so many people that I've supervised that they've done supervision with someone that maybe weren't the great supervisor, but they also didn't submit their hours. They didn't do a lot of things that essentially led to them having to repay and redo hours over again, which is awful.
Right. Oh,
So take that role seriously,
yeah.
have systems in place. How am I going to track this stuff? How am I encourage you to have a contract.
Yeah.
How am I going to submit this paperwork, knowing what that looks like? What do you require from them? Those types of things I think are really, really important. And that's before the education
Yeah.
of actually understanding how to supervise somebody. If you can sit in on supervisions with somebody and kind of see what other people do, there's lots of different supervision styles. So kind of understanding what that looks like for you. I'm more of a empowerment collaborative person. So like, I don't personally come to supervision and say, I know everything and everybody has to listen to me. And I'm the only one who gets to like ask questions, direct and speak, so to speak. Right. Some people do that.
Right.
That's not me. I'm very much, what do you guys think? I also know that like, there are people who have different specialties than me. They have different perspectives than me. I also treat my interns when I have them in different things. You're fresh. Sometimes because I'm seasoned, I don't see the simple things that can be really powerful.
Sure.
So like I always have, everyone has value to add, and I want to encourage that value to be brought to the group. So that's how I do supervision personally. And sometimes I'll be the first to give feedback, but sometimes I'm like, what do you guys think? Because I want people to feel included and encouraged to build their confidence and know, how they grow and that they do have competencies. So I never want to be perceived as undermining their value and their skill and their knowledge. So I would say start with those types of things.
Okay.
So understanding the rules, the process, where do you get the training that you need? That's one of the challenges is finding quality training. I see that question a lot. There are a couple national places that have trainings. Otherwise, you might have to look at state-specific training. So the Telehealth Certification Training Institute has a supervision curriculum forum. So every other month they do a free training for supervision if you show up in person, or you can purchase them later. So they do a lot of trainings there. They do free trainings, and the Clinical Supervision Directory has trainings that are supervised specific that are, I think both of those are pretty nationwide, as far as kind of finding some places that you can find that might cover you regardless of where you are. So those would be the things I would say to
Yeah.
kind of get started with
Man.
if you're
Okay.
interested.
Yeah, well, I mean, this has been a primer on supervision. I'm like, this is amazing what you're doing, and how you have such a passion for this for this niche and for helping therapists become supervisors and become better supervisors, and which only helps like the next generation of therapists. So all of the things that you mentioned, like we'll put everything in the show notes so people can just go over there and they can click on it and they can learn more about what it is that you offer. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we end?
Let me think.
Sure.
I don't know specifically, other than if you have a passion for like mentoring and coaching and teaching, because those are all the roles of a supervisor, we definitely need you. So
We
please
do.
share that with others. Because we need you. So
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and for those listening, if you want to forward this episode to anybody that you might think would be a great supervisor, I know we would appreciate that. That would be awesome. So, well, Amy, thank you so much for being here. It's so great to get to know you and, what you're doing to help therapists.
yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard is edited and engineered by Chelsea Weaver. If you're looking to start a podcast or ready to take the editing off of your plate, be sure to visit chelseaweaverpodcasting.com. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine.
Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover more fantastic content.
And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.